So let's discuss about state policy. So after discussing state principles, we are now going to discuss about state policy. So okay, so let's as I said earlier, when we speak of state policies, these are policies which, aside from what is listed here in Article 2, these are policies which are interlinked with other policies. That is, other than this Article 2, some are interspersed or linked with other provisions of the Constitution. Okay, so let's start first with Section 7. So in Section 7 states that the state shall pursue an independent foreign policy. So in its relations with other states, the paramount consideration shall be national sovereignty, territorial integrity, national interest, and the right to self-determination. So, of course, the frequent question here as to independent foreign policy is, what constitutes independent foreign policy? What's the definition of it? When we speak of independent foreign policy, you relate it to the independence and sovereignty of the nation. It just means eh, that the Philippines is not susceptible, or it will not allow themselves to be subjugated, or you know to be subjugated or to be dictated by another state. So if that would be the case, then you would not have any independence. So for example, when we were still colonies of the United States, although we identified ourselves as Commonwealth, or as a territory of the United States, we do not have an independent foreign policy. That foreign policy, whether we like it or not, is linked with the United States of America. But since we have declared the Philippines has declared itself independent. Okay, it follows that they would pursue their foreign policy based on what the government would follow. Remember that in some aspects, and some would disagree, that the president supposedly is the architect of our foreign policy. So, but what about if your foreign policy, you lean into one nation? So, for example, right now there are mentions that, of course, we are traditionally leaning to America as an ally. Does it necessarily mean that we are violating the state policy of an independent foreign policy? The answer there is no, because having such relationships with other countries, especially the United States, we know the history between the Philippines and the United States. They are very close enough that of course, despite of all the troubles, they would always still seek each other out as an ally here in the Asia Pacific. It doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't necessarily mean that if the Philippines is more in with bias with America, it does not necessarily mean that we are violating the independent foreign policy section in our constitution. We are just leaning to it, but insofar as we are concerned, there is no direct interference from the United States as to how are we going to run our foreign policy. So that by itself is a manifestation that it does not violate that independent foreign policy. Also note that in the previous administration, they have this slant, they are slanting themselves in favor of China. Nonetheless, despite that slant, okay, and of course alleged things that happened during those times, included and told, there is still an independent foreign policy on the part of the Philippines. It's just that it's more centric with China as a partner during those times. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there is a direct interference on government by a foreign power. So that's the only way that this state policy would be transgressed. Okay, so okay. Now let's go now to Section 8. So Section 8 states that the Philippines, consistent with the national interest, adopts and pursues a policy of nuclear weapons in its territory. So of course we have this policy of no nuclear weapons in its territory. But does this mean that we are banning nuclear energy, or are we banning nuclear technology? it appears that what is banned here would be nuclear weapons. It's more on the nuclear weapons being stored here for a long period of time. Okay, so of course, if there would be a question like, let's say, a nuclear submarine, okay, can a nuclear submarine be be an object of a possible prohibition? The answer there may be it may not be, because remember that submarines usually, if they go to ports of call, they do not really stay permanently. As a matter of fact, of course, a submarine is a vessel that would go through to and fro from one territory to another. Okay, and of course, to emphasize again, when we speak of nuclear weapons, it does not include our development of nuclear physics or nuclear technology. So we have this office, 'di ba, under the DOST, 'di ba? I think the PNR, the Philippine Nuclear Research Institute. So these are the office. This ensures our this upkeeping with with nuclear technology, because of course nuclear technology, if used properly, it's going to be beneficial to everyone. Okay, all right, then section 9, okay, and section 10, we can discuss this together. So of course, the state shall promote a just and dynamic social order that will ensure the prosperity and independence of the nation and free the people from poverty through policies that provide adequate social services, promote full employment, rising standard of living, and an improved quality of life for all. Then, first, section 10 is the state shall promote social justice in all phases of national development. Okay, so of course, yung issue natin from the when we speak of freedom of party or from poverty, this is connected with the attainment of this concept of social justice. I think you may have read it so too much in your labor law discussions about what's the definition of social justice as defined in Kalalang versus Williams, di ba? But so that being said, of course, when we speak of social justice, if we can recall what the former President Ramon Magsaysay said, of course, social justice, in a way to describe it in action, would be giving less in more giving more in law to those who are less in life. Okay. Now, of course, how is this social justice being being maintained insofar as our laws and constitution is concerned? Of course, we should relate social justice and of course promoting the freedom from poverty. We should relate this of course to your provisions on labor under Article 13 of your constitution. Okay, so you have to relate it as in relation to labor as a primary primary force, okay, insofar as work is concerned, di ba? And of course, if everyone's going to get adequate proper work, adequate salaries, you'll be able to promote or maintain this concept of social justice, especially to the workers. Okay, there is this thing. Then of course, we would always have this our some Filipinos who are, of course, they are really having difficulty in looking for work. Okay, so of course, there right now, I think you are aware about, of course, the Pantawid Pamilya Pampamilya program, or of course, colloquially we call them the 4Ps, di ba? So this is a mechanism of the government in recognizing those who are needed to have, to aside from social amelioration, needed to have this necessary funding. Of course, we understand right now that the 4Ps is a little bit criticized because 4Ps is becoming a political mechanism by the government. But nonetheless, that's the intent of that's the intent of that law, in order to promote social justice, in order for a person mired in poverty to be alleviated. Okay, so that's the idea there. Now, whether or not, well, would this be sustainable? Of course, it's something that we can look forward what will happen next. Okay, then of course, Section 11, the state values the dignity of every human person and guarantees full respect for human rights. Of course, I think we have been discussing this in public international law. We are a member of the UDHR, and we are also signatories to most of the core instruments of the UDHR, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Supreme Court has already cited several jurisprudence applying direct provisions of the UDHR, as well as the ICCPR or the CEDAW. Okay? Ang dami ng mga desisyon ng Supreme Court ang dinideclare dyan. Of course, babalik tayo ng konti doon sa Section 9. Okay? Ba't tayo babalik sa Section 9? So, of course, we have this concept of poverty. We would relate this to human rights. Remember that under our Constitution, we have the Universal Declaration. Under our Constitution, we have to relate this to the direct provisions of the Constitution on the creation of the Commission on Human Rights. Okay, so they say that the Philippines has a constitution. Yeah, it is only, I think, it's only, they said that, I don't know if this is exactly true. They said that it is the only country now in the world to have a Commission on Human Rights embedded in the Constitution. Now, that being said, of course, I think you have already encountered the case of Simon versus Commission on Human Rights. And of course, in other cases like Carino versus Commission on Human Rights. So, it's stated there in Simon and Carino that what is focused but the work that is focused for the task at hand by the Commission on Human Rights, they refer to first generation human rights, your civil and political rights. If we go back the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you would recall that the UDHR has three generations of human rights. You have the first, second, and third generation. So your first one would be your civil and political rights. The second one will be your social and economic rights, and your third generation would be generational or other rights. Okay, so of course the third generation rights, since they are generation, this is subject to improvement or evolution for the coming years. But of course, we're concentrated with the first and the second generation. Of course, in Simon versus CHR, note that in that case, it refers to vendors who were allegedly demolished, or were chased out by the Quezon City government at the time. So they went to the Commission on Human Rights because they felt that their right to livelihood, which is a human right, well, technically it's a human right, is being oppressed. They're being suckered. So of course, the CHR wants to subpoena the city government of Quezon City. They don't want, so they went to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said that insofar as the CHR is concerned, they are only concerned with first generation human rights or civil and political rights in particular. Actually, we didn't mention the first generation, but if you read the case, they upheld, based on, of course, the Constitutional Commission of 1986 deliberations, that it's only concentrated on civil and political rights, or the first generation, if you're going to look at your UDHR. It does not include other rights. Okay, so since what they mentioned was the life to livelihood, it would fall under the second generation of human rights. It does not fall within the purview of the CHR. But of course, nowadays we have this law. We have this Magna Carta for the poor. Okay, so the Magna Carta for the poor is your legislative or statutory mechanism in order to recognize and realize the second generation of human rights. Okay, so you would see there's the right to housing, right to education, right to other services, right to employment. So these are more or less second generation human rights. But the question is, will the CHR still have jurisdiction there? Note that if you read the Magna Carta for the poor, you would not see any tinge or any participation of the Commission on Human Rights, because since these are social and economic rights, they are best attuned to the direct the direct the direct responsibility was being tasked to those who should be able to properly address such right. That's such socio-economic right. So, for example, right to education, they assign the Department of Labor, the Department of Education. When it comes to right to employment, it's either the DMW or the Department of Labor. Okay, if it's about food security, it's the related offices. Okay, with regards to food security, so it's specific there in your example, right to housing. The one responsible would be, of course, in the load, it's not yet DSUD, it's the HLU, but now it's under the DSUD. Okay, so the point is, the CHR won't interfere on socio-economic rights. Other offices would be responsible into that compliance. All right, okay. Now, Section 12. So, Section 12, the state recognizes the sanctity of family life and self-protect and strengthen the family as a basic autonomous social institution. It shall equally protect the life of the mother and the life of the unborn from conception. The natural and primary right and duty of parents in the rearing of the youth for civic efficiency and development of moral character shall receive the support of the government. So you have to relate this to your Article 15. Okay, so we have this specific provision, Article 15, about the family. We have to relate, of course, family as a basic autonomous social institution. You have to relate this to, of course, other provisions like marriage and other provisions as stated in Article 15. Okay, of course, the hot topic regarding this in relation to Article 15, Section 2 is, of course, the issue on absolute divorce. Okay, so as it stands now, it's I don't know if Congress will park on that. Okay, but nonetheless, it's a very much hot topic when it comes to absolute divorce. Okay. Then okay, Section 13. So Section 13, the state recognizes the vital role of the youth in nation building and shall promote and protect their physical, moral, spiritual, intellectual, and social well-being. It shall inculcate the youth patriotism and nationalism and encourage the involvement in public and civil affairs and civic affairs. Okay. So of course, what's the definition of youth? Okay, what's the range? Baka nagtataka kayo. Relate natin to sa SK law kasi 'di ba sa SK law kailangan ang tumakbo is 15 to 20 to 30 years old. Qualified ka to run for SK if you are 15 to 30 years old. Same goes to party list. Okay, so if your party list is a youth party list, hanggang 30 years old lang yung cap mo, yung expiry date. Kung lumagpas ka ng 30 years old, gawa ka ng panibagong party list. Now, of course, the next question is, baka tanungin sa inyo, saan ba galing yung definition na ang youth ay 15 to 30 years old? You read your Youth in Nation Building Act, si RA 8044. So, sabi sa RA 8044, ang definition ng youth is between 15 to 30 years old. Kaya magtataka kayo bakit ang SK 15 to 30 years old. Kasi yung definition ng youth nakalagay sa Youth in Nation Building Act. Okay? Alright, so section 14. So the state recognizes the role of women in nation building and shall ensure the fundamental equality before the law of women and men. So of course, as much as possible, women are are given equal opportunities as well as equivalent also to the work of men. So syempre, kung may baba, and remember that nowadays women is more or less empowered already. Most of our government officials, to be fair, most of them are women. Okay, so there's already a reflection of this policy that is being realized right now. Of course, there are many statutory mechanisms like, for example, 'di ba si Magna Carta for Women. So this is more or less a law which strengthens the position of women empowerment. But nonetheless, of course, there are still certain aspects in which the law still protects women because sometimes they are different from, truth be told, of course, the physicality of women by itself, they are different from men. So, di ba, if you can recall yung kaso nila Pasay versus Drilon at saka Pasay versus Torres, di ba, hindi pinadeploy yung mga babae. Kasi of course, kahit sabihin, of course, sinasabi kasi ng Pasay doon is, well, well, we cannot be considered as not that equal to men. But sabi dun sa Pasay cases, it is still a valid classification that sometimes women are not that too strong, di ba, as compared to men. This was also affirmed dun sa Garcia versus Drilon, di ba, yung case regarding sa Bausi. So aside dun sa upholding yung valid classification nung women and men insofar as Bausi is concerned, of course there is this recognition that women what is should be more or less protected. Actually, it is more in keeping with the state policy to recognize the role of women by protecting them from abuse, 'di ba? So kaya nagkaroon ng BAUSI. Okay. All right. Then section 15 and 16 we can discuss this together. So the state shall protect and promote the right to health of the people and instill health consciousness among them. Then the state shall protect and advance the right of the people to a balanced and healthful ecology in accord with the rhythm and harmony of nature. Of course, if you would recall the case of Oposa versus Factoran, okay? So when Oposa versus Factoran conceptualized the concept of intergenerational responsibility. That is why the petitioners there who are the sons and daughters of they are the youth, by in particular they are minors. They were given locus standi to challenge logging permits at that time because it is but an intergenerational responsibility. It's not a protection of the environment while they are alive, but also for the upcoming generations, okay, to come, okay. Of course, the state also wants to promote the right of health. They wanted to, as much as possible, try to have an improve health system. Although, of course, truth be told, we cannot really rely on our health system. Okay, so but of course, I hope that someday it's going to be in fruition. Okay, all right. Then section 16, the state shall protect and advance the right of the people. Okay, na 16 na pa. So 17. So the 17 shall give priority to education, science and technology, arts, culture, and sports to foster patriotism and nationalism, accelerate social progress, and promote total human liberation and development. So, of course, we kind of discussed education a while during the discussion on religion. Of course, the optional religious instructions. Okay, you have to look at education in this light. Okay, sige, di-discuss natin din si arts. Because remember, itong section 17, magkasama pa si education, si culture, at saka si sports. Noon ang tawag kasi noon sa Department of Education is Department of Education, Culture and Sports. Nowadays, 'di ba, separate na sila. So pagdating sa education, it's just DepEd. Yung culture napunta na sa ibang offices like the NCAA and other national offices or agencies. Then syempre, sports natin, yung mga PSAs natin, 'di ba? Yung nakita natin nung last Olympics, 'di ba? They are more or less controlled by public sports yung mga mga NSAs pala, yung National Sports Associations natin, okay? So, punta tayo sa education a bit. Of course, you have to look at education in two senses. So, the first sense is, of course, when it comes to basic education, yung education natin from elementary to high school, okay? Note that insofar as that is concerned, if the state is going to pass a laws on education, this is considered as an exercise of the state's police power because they wanted to make sure that the youth will be able to get quality education. Okay? So, sinabi nga dun sa case ng concerned teachers, yung COSETUP versus Secretary of Education, the K to 12 law was unsuccessfully challenged because the measure by itself being a police power measure was adequate enough to implement improvements in the education through the K to 12 program. Then, of course, we have to look at the second part, which is, of course, when it comes to higher education institutions. Of course, number one, these are under the Commission on Higher Education, and when we speak of law schools, the law schools are under the Legal Education Board. Okay, but of course, insofar as higher institutions of learning are concerned, okay, what is cherished is the concept of academic freedom. Okay, so you have to note the four house, okay, house and what's of your academic freedom, di ba? Who to teach, how to teach, where to teach, then how you're going to instruct, di ba? So you just look at the four steps there. Okay, so I think there's a lot of cases discussing academic freedom as being absolute. Of course, you have to look at it at the aspects of the student, at the aspect of the teacher. So, for example, in the aspect of the teacher, they can the expanse of exercising academic freedom is up to their discretion so that they can determine how are they going to evaluate the students. So, di ba, naalala niyo yung kaso ni Camacho versus Coresis, and later on, dun sa discussion ni Pimentel versus LEB. Okay, the school has this academic freedom, especially sa the teachers sa Camacho versus Coresis. There is this discussion na the teacher can do whatever technique it takes in order for him to determine whether or not the student will pass the subject or not. Okay? Siyempre, pagdating naman sa evaluation, we have yung UP Board of Regents na case wherein, of course, masyado matigas sa ulo yung nagbigay ng thesis, ayaw magbigay ng resources niya. So, hindi siya inapprove graduate kasi allegedly yung thesis niya ay plagiarized. Okay? Sabi ng Supreme Court, part of the and parcel of academic freedom is the discretion of the institution whether or not to pass or fail a student because it is able, because the question is whether or not the student is able or not to comply with yung academic standards niya. Okay? So, that's also possible. You can look at it at that angle. Okay? So, academic freedom. And of course, connected din sa academic freedom yung freedom of expression. So, I think there are several cases, di ba? Si Villar versus TIP, sikat yung Villar versus TIP. Note that if you are going to be absent, okay, because you went to a rally, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get sanctioned kasi the protection of freedom of expression also reaches within the realm of academic freedom. So, doon sa Villar versus TIP, ang sinanction lang yun talagang mga nag-absent kasi talagang pasaway lang, absent. Pero yung mga nag-absent dahil sumali sila doon sa protest kasi may protesta sila, that cannot be taken against them because they are just exercising their academic freedom in relation to their freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. Okay? All right. Then, of course, sa arts, cultures, and sports, especially sa sports, NSAs, di ba? I think right now there is this discussion. Ang usual na issue naman lagi dyan is it's similar to Mandanas. It's more on the sharing. But I think the recent case of Diao versus PCSO, as we speak now, the Supreme Court has already ruled that the PCSO and the PAGCOR should give their appropriate and correct share of their funding in order to support the national sports associations. So, sa ngayon siguro we-figure out nila yan. Pero right now, we already have a decision regarding that matter na yung mga national sports associations, they're entitled to adequate funding, okay, dun sa mga arms ng government na required silang bigyan. Kaya nga nagkaroon ng PCSO, kaya nagkaroon ng loto, 'di ba? Or ng PAGCOR is of course to add additional revenue to other projects which may be of interest, especially to our national pride, 'di ba? All right. Then section 18, so the state affirms labor as a primary social economic forms. It shall protect the rights of workers. Of course, you have to note this under Article 13 of your constitution. Of course, I am going to leave it to other labor experts like Attorney Duca or Dean Pokis to discuss about labor. I leave it up to them, okay? Now, Section 19, the state shall develop a self-reliant and independent national economy effectively controlled by Filipinos. Okay, kind of a little discussion. We have this concept of laissez-faire. So when we speak of laissez-faire, as a rule, diba, if you can recall your Adam Smith in your economics, government shall not interfere with private business or private economic affairs. But the problem is if this was the tendency, the private sector would make an abuse out of the system. Siyempre, kung they have this capability or power to create a monopoly or other economic demands, okay? So, as we stand now, there is not really laissez-faire under our current system, under our state. Although it's not necessarily too much, it's not necessarily a limit, a ban on laissez-faire. It's more of just a limitation. What we are saying is, of course, we are in a free market economy, but of course, the state is without prejudice into exercising certain measures or laws in order to check any powers on free economy, di ba? So, example, example, dati noon pag ang gas because right now oil is deregulated right now. So it's on the discretion of the market, okay? But before, even if you read your old provisions of the civil code, the government previously can regulate prices of commodities, okay? So ibig sabihin nun, hindi laissez-faire totally ang ating government. Right now naman, hindi naman totally laissez-faire because there would always be economic limitations being imposed on certain areas of our and of course, syempre may mga government offices tayo for development of our national economy. So for example, yung kapitbahay ng UANP na NEDA, 'di ba? So that's those are government offices that usually limit yung it usually limits the acts of private enterprise. Okay. All right. Of course, si 19 we should relate it to section 20, 'di ba? So indispensable role ng private sector provides incentives sa needed business. So of course, we have this if you have already tackled commercial law, meron tayong mga offices then like of course the SEC, the Bureau of Investment. So these are related offices in order to promote private private businesses to prosper. Okay. Then of course, Section 21, the state shall promote comprehensive rural development and agrarian reform. I would assume this was also discussed in your labor, but of course, just a quick overview. Of course, right now we the agrarian reform program has evolved. Okay, so no nagsimula sa Republic Act 3844 yan kay Macapagal, tapos naging PD 27 kay Marcos, tapos naging Carlo no 1988 sa panahon ni President Aquino. Then nung kay President Gloria nagkaroon ng ang amendments on RA 9700. Then I think last year there was already another law in support of this rural development agrarian report that was signed by BBM. Okay, so yun, nag-evolve naman pa rin ang rural development and agrarian reform sector. Of course, there are other underlying problems, but of course, right now that's still we still have this we still have this DAR in order in Department of Agrarian Reform to deal with all of these problems. Okay. Then Section 22, so the state recognizes and promotes the rights of indigenous cultural communities. So we have already the National Commission on Indigenous People. So yung then of course yung dun sa NCIP, they are embodied, and of course the indigenous peoples law, we connect it to the IRPA law. Okay, so dun sa IRPA meron silang special mechanisms, 'di ba? Sa IRPA pwede nga sila magkaroon ng sariling titles dun sa kanilang mga ancestral domains or ancestral lands. Okay, all right, then 23, the state shall encourage non-governmental, community-based, or sectoral organizations to promote the welfare of the nation. Of course, you have to relate this to the party list law. Pero well, alam niyo naman ako ano nangyari sa party list law natin. I'm not going to comment on it. Pero yun talaga dapat yung purpose niyan. Nonetheless, regardless if there's a party list or not, the state usually is dependent from non-government organizations or sectoral organizations because they form part of this support, especially bigla ko naalala, 'di ba? Remember that before, government is only concentrates on governmental functions, 'di ba? May tinatawag tayo dati no na ministrant at saka constituent functions. When we speak of ministrant functions, 'di ba? These are functions which are within the realm of how government operates, 'di ba? Magtayo ng building, magtayo ng city hall, magtayo ng kalsada. Then came constituent functions. So, usually yung constituent functions is close to the general welfare of the people. So, housing, 'di ba? Housing, social welfare, okay? These are considered as constituent functions. Then through the years, and as acknowledged, 'di ba, do sa kaso na ACPA versus CUGCO, this is the 1972 case. 'Di ba? In-acknowledge nila na unti-unting nawala na yung distinction, okay? Between ministrant and constituent function, which is true as of today because of course we have these traditional offices like Department of National Defense, Department of Foreign Affairs, this Department of the Interior, and of course local government. These are more or less what you see as governmental or on the old classification ministrant functions. But now government also participates in functions which are not really governmental in character but through the welfare like DSWD, uh, DSWD, the SUD, di ba? Before they are separate agencies, but now they are now in a single department. It's now the DSUD, then Department of Labor, but it eventually evolved into two. It became Department of Labor, and then you separated the seamen and other migrant workers. Nagkaroon ng DMW. So right now, ang naging identity na ngayon ng government offices or functions would be either governmental or proprietary. And I think we discussed it sa state immunity na syempre pag governmental, it's under their official acts. You cannot sue the state. If it is proprietary, there's a possibility that you can sue the state, okay? Because they're entering themselves as if they are private individuals, okay? All right, then the state recognizes the vital role of communication and information in nation building. Of course, we have the Department of Information and Communication Technology or the DIC. Okay, so this is now their. So this is the office now in the role of doing the communication. Of course, we are now in the internet age. Yung nga lang, reklamo pa rin, masyado mabagal pa rin ang internet. Okay? Alright. So, okay, Section 25, the state shall ensure the autonomy of local governments. Of course, you have to relate this to Section 10 of your Constitution. Of course, when we speak of autonomy, there are two types of autonomy. Of course, there is this autonomy in the sense of regular local governments. You have to relate this to Section 3 of your LGC on decentralization. Then there's this other autonomy with respect to specific regions that addresses autonomy like the Cordillera Autonomous Region and the ARM, which is now the BARM. Okay? So, nag-evolve yung ARM natin from the Constitution. Right now, they are now the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. Okay? So, then Section 26, guarantee equal access for opportunities for public service and prohibit political dynasties as may be defined by law. So, yan yung question ngayon, 'di ba, sa political dynasty. So, as much as possible, we should give equal access to of opportunity. So, bigyan natin ng pagkakataon, sa totoo lang naman, dinesign naman talaga ang ating gobyerno para bigyan ng pagkakataon ang hindi lang abogado ang umupo. Siyempre, you're giving opportunity to even the farmer, a simple farmer, to have access to opportunities to public service. Ang nangyayari nga lang, alam naman natin, puro artista, di ba? Wink wink, di ba? Yun ang nangyari. Pero hindi sila, hindi lang sila exclusive, di ba? Just to drive the point. Then of course, political dynasties, I think this has been already a long discussion. Of course, you have to note section 10 of your RA 10742. That is a law which would seem to be an anti-dynastic provision of law. Kaya baka tanungin sa inyo, meron na ba tayong mga enabling laws on dynasties? Dati ang sagot natin wala eh. Pero ngayon meron na. We have now section 10 of RA 10742 na may ban on certain relatives of SK officials or SK elected officials, as well as SK elected officials from acquiring seats, okay, or positions in the government, okay. Then section 7, states shall maintain honesty and integrity in public service and take positive and effective measures against graft and corruption. Again, I think we kind of discussed this. We have to go back to Article 11 of your Constitution. Diba? Public office is a public trust. Okay? So aside dun sa mga constitutional mechanisms natin sa Article 11 like impeachment and of course the Office of the Ombudsman, we have several laws. Of course, insofar as basic decorum of public officers, we have RA 6713 or the law or the Code of Ethical Standards of for public officials. So then you have to also consider also the Ease of Doing Business Act, okay? So you have to consider these mechanisms because you have to maintain your code of ethical standards. Remember, siguro di-discuss natin to we're going to discuss this further in the law on public officers. Diba? We will learn later on section 5, section 6 ng RA 6713. They are now being used against government officials or employees who are lazy or do not want to answer their emails. Okay? So, ngayon, alam naman na rin ng tao na yan ang mga bagay na pwede nilang i-criticize sa mga ating public officials. Okay? Then of course, we have the criminal aspect, di ba, na meron tayong criminal aspect. Of course, we have the Graft and Corrupt Practices Act, si RA 3019 natin, and the Plunder Law. Okay, so this covers mga crimes natin against public officer. Of course, that also includes the Vice Penal Code natin, di ba? Yung title nga ba yon? Title 8, Title 7, kasi 8 yung crimes against persons eh. So alam ko Title 7 sila, yung crimes committed by public officers. Okay? Then, okay, positive measures against graft and corruption. Of course, dun sa mechanism mismo ng graft and corruption, we also have this bidding, di ba? So, yung bidding ensures equal participation and of course, it also eliminates yung graft and corruption by the procurement process. So, meron na tayong bagong procurement law which modified yung alam nating si RA 9184. So, it's already amended and incorporated new provisions insofar as procurement is concerned. Okay. Then finally, Section 28. So, Section 28 is subject to reasonable conditions prescribed by law. The state adopts and implements a policy of full public disclosure of all its transactions involving public interest. So you have to relate this to your Article 3, Section 7 of your Constitution, your right to information for involving matters of public concern. Okay, so magka-connect sila na kailangan mo ng disclosure kasi syempre kailangan maging transparent ang government all its transactions. Of course, this transparency, as I said, as related to your Article 3, Section 7, and of course, in relation to several cases by Frank Chavez, namely si Chavez versus PCGG at saka si Chavez versus Pay Amari, there are limitations as to that full public disclosure. If there would always be an imperative, like example, national security concerns, of course, and if it's really that confidential. These are matters which would be considered if there should be full public disclosure or not. Okay, so that is it. Okay, that's it for our discussion on state policies. Okay.